Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now today we're going to be talking about AI, and before you all let out a big sigh or groan, I know it's an overused buzzword, but on this podcast we try to get into the meat and bones and find real answers behind those headlines. So today we're going to be talking about the future of AI-human relations. Where does AI do well today, and where does it actually struggle? That's something that we don't talk about enough. And I also want to talk a little bit more about AI's impact on the labour market from a both positive and negative point of view. There's so many binary articles out there of AI is bad or AI is good, but I want to explore both sides of that and also explore developments in robotics, the commercialisation of space travel, and much more. We got so much to get through today, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Denver, Colorado, where Rob Carpenter is going to be my partner in crime today. He is the founder and CEO of a company called Valiant AI and a passionate technologist and serial entrepreneur driven to bring new, exciting products to market. But enough rambling from me. Let's get Rob onto the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Rob. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So my name is Rob Carpenter. I'm the founder and CEO of Valiant AI. We're based in Denver, Colorado, and we build conversational artificial intelligence systems for enterprises. And our first market is quick serve restaurants and drive-thrus, which are very big in the States. And instead of pulling into the drive-thru and talking to an employee, you would be greeted by our AI. It can answer questions, clarify things, and then most importantly, take your order and give you a total.
Well, I'd love to take you back before conversational intelligence and find out a little bit more about your origin story. I mean, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, what lit that spark within you, and what it was essentially that put you on this path you're on today?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think I'll probably have one of the more random backgrounds
cool.
I have on here. So I was born and raised in Dillingham, Alaska, right on the west coast of Alaska on the Bering Sea. I grew up in a Yupik Eskimo village of about 2,000 people. My dad managed a radio station and my mom was a public area health nurse, giving people vaccinations and things like that. My graduating class was the largest class in like a decade, and we had 32 people that graduated the year I graduated. And so it was in ways a very unique and interesting place, but I think in other ways it was a little, I think for my ultimate ambitions, it was stifling and small, and I don't think it really had the access to the things that I was really passionate about. And I think for a lot of people that have gotten into entrepreneurship, when I was 16, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it really just opened up my eyes to a different way of kind of looking at the world, the value of owning assets and compounding interest. And so it really kind of kicked me off on that journey early and had the sort of classic lawn mowing business in high school. In college, I started an advertising company. When I was working my first job, it was fairly entrepreneurial. I was in commercial real estate. And then around the time I started working on my master's degree, I started a custom software development company. I ultimately got a degree, MBA with a specialization in enterprise technology management. And I started this custom software development company in my spare bedroom. I grew it to about 30 employees with offices in Hyderabad, India, and actually in London, where I acquired 2 other companies, grew the business to 7 figures in revenue. And it was a really wonderful, over the course of about 6.5 to 7 years, learning opportunity. But I think for anybody that's kind of been in the startup world for a long time, it's kind of easy to recognize that service-based businesses are nice because they're easy to start. You can generate revenue, you can make profit. But ultimately, they're kind of a treadmill, and you have to keep running and closing new clients. And after a certain amount of time, it just gets a bit exhausting. And so when I came up with the idea for Valiant, I was really excited to transition over and start a product-based company.
Wow, what an amazing story. I mean, I do think there'd be a lot of people listening, or maybe people that even know you, as the AI guy or the conversational intelligence guy in Denver, and got no idea about that upbringing in Alaska, etc. And one of the reasons that I always ask that question, it's so great to hear those stories like that. And you're still in the great outdoors, though, right? Because it's beautiful there in Denver.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's probably the nice thing as you get a little bit older, right? If you're really thoughtful about it, you get to kind of pick where you want to be in life. And so ultimately, Denver and my wife and our two daughters, we live right outside of Boulder. So we're right at the foothills to the Rockies. We have land that we can go camp on. And so we take our family hiking. I mean, literally just about every single weekend. I'm an avid bike rider, so I can go out my front door and I can bike for, almost 100 miles, basically in any direction, it feels like. So I think that I get a lot of that sort of Alaskan spirit in Colorado, but, I can hire employees and I can have customers and we can have office space, and there's just a lot more infrastructure here to support me in my ambitions that unfortunately Alaska just doesn't really have yet.
So that path led you to Valiant AI, which does offer conversational AI for the restaurant, retail, service-based industries. But can you tell the listeners a little bit more about Valiant AI, what it is, and what it is that makes you different from other conversational AI solutions on the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Valiant AI does, as I mentioned, is we automate the order taking process in drive-thru restaurants. So right now in the United States, there's 1.7 million unfilled positions in restaurants. In fact, 1 of every 6 job openings right now are for restaurants. And for these, poor managers or owners of these restaurant locations, it's extremely hard to find somebody. And then once you do find somebody, turnover rates can be anywhere between 150 to 300% per year. So imagine basically every 4 months, you've got to rehire every single position in your business. I mean, it's just an impossibly difficult task that they're dealing with. And we got started in 2017. And I think sometimes, when you hear people looking in hindsight at their career and those that have had successes, they'll admit that it was a lot of hard work, but a lot of times it was also just luck. And I think that's really what's kind of playing a heavy hand here for Valiant as well, because when we started in 2017, there were labor problems in restaurants, but it wasn't acute. And then you fast forward and we have COVID, restaurants shut down, people are hesitant to come back to work. There's sort of the great resignation going on right now. And here we are with intellectual property, real, true blue technology that we've developed that solves a very real need. And it fits such a critical role in these restaurants right now. And so the demand and interest in the technology is insanely high. And so from that perspective, it's really nice to be in this place. And then, it's hard to say 100% what differentiates us from other companies, because I don't have obviously a deep understanding of what other conversational AI companies are doing. At least within the use case of this very, in my opinion, next generation conversational AI technology, there are very, very few applications of it actually in the market. So there's, probably hundreds or thousands of companies that you can find that are working on it. But I'd say we've probably, in the 5 years we've been doing this, seen a 80% attrition rate of companies that have tried to be competitive and have ultimately come and gone. We are now, I think, getting distilled down to probably half a dozen real companies with real technology. We're live taking orders in 4 different restaurants right now. And that's kind of for drive-thru, almost about as far as anybody's gotten at this point. So I think over the next year, we're going to see things start to transition as this technology does truly kind of move out of research and development, becomes viable, solves, consistently a critical problem for these restaurants. And I would expect to see basically every major quick serve restaurant brand in the United States either adopting and rolling this technology out, or at minimum piloting this technology.
And it does feel that almost every new solution has the AI tag on now, and a lot of it is overhyped. Some companies are even saying AI, even though they don't have any AI in their system.
Yeah.
So just to bust a few myths today and be a little bit more realistic, what does AI do particularly well, and where does it struggle?
So AI at the end of the day is really just software that looks for patterns. Traditional software development is binary. It's ones and zeros. It either is or it is not. With AI, it's more of a prediction engine. Think of the classic example of vision-related AI that you're feeding through a machine learning algorithm, and it's trying to say, is this a cat or is this not a cat? It's ultimately going to arrive at basically a prediction value and say, well, I'm 87% confident this is a cat. But for the most part, it's never going to be binary where it's going to say, 100.0% this is cat. It's just going to give you a confidence. And so I think that's where this technology becomes really difficult is the prediction that it gave you that it's 87% confident that that's a cat even accurate? And can you trust it at 87% that that is a cat or that that is not a cat? And for something simple like a cat, it's not a big deal. But if you look at these social media companies and they're trying to filter and sometimes very horrendous imagery that gets uploaded, it's really critical that the AI gets it correct in terms of determining if these are appropriate images or not. And that's where I think this technology needs to continue to keep advancing, where we use machine learning and artificial intelligence more generally is around speech to text. So a customer pulls into the drive-thru, the AI greets them, and the customer says, I want a cheeseburger. That's ultimately a audio file that's being picked up by the microphone that has to be turned into something. And so we use machine learning to make a prediction about what the accompanying text is. If you think of a traditional audio wave file, what's the text that is predicted by those rises and falls in that that wavelength? And so trying to get that correct is really critical. Right now, state of the art for speech to text technology is about 85 to 90%, which seems good until you think about it from the inverse, which is, I'm going to miss 1 in every 10 words. And, if that word is or and, you're probably fine. But if it's no, then that's a huge problem. Maybe somebody has an allergy and they say no gluten, and the AI picks up gluten. That's going to be a big problem for that customer. And so I think where this technology needs to keep advancing, and I think one of the things that's really held back over the last probably half decade to decade that people have been specifically trying to work on these use cases is that speech to text just has to keep getting more and more accurate. And so that's where, Valyant kind of feeling like we're on the forefront of the field here. That's what's really exciting and gets me out of bed, is just constantly trying to advance and push this technology further.
And there's also a lot of debates around how it will impact workforces. On one hand, people say, well, actually free people up from repetitive and mundane tasks and allow them to do more value-add activities. And on the other, it's people are going to get left behind. So I'm curious, how do you see AI's impact on the labour market from a both positive and negative standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. In 2016, I actually wrote a TED Talk that I pitched that sadly was not picked up, but really around, hey, with the accelerating rate of AI and automation, yes, on the one hand, we have to be worried about people losing their jobs, but on the second hand, we have to be worried about people having a substantial decrease in their discretionary spending. And if somebody loses their job, yeah, that's bad for the economy, but also that person can't go out and buy a new iPhone or a Tesla or a McDonald's, and so by reducing that spending and the fact that basically the entire capitalist system is dependent on people spending more money, that could have a really negative downturn effect, because then those companies, Apple, Tesla, McDonald's, hire fewer people. And so you kind of get into a negative spiral. So all of that to say, I was very worried to pessimistic kind of about things during that time frame. I think what's happened since then is that we've realized the shine, I think, has come off on AI a little bit. I think back in 2016, Musk was predicting we were only a few months away from self-driving cars. Now, I think probably some of the most optimistic estimates are like 2030. So I think that AI, if AI had automated a dozen industries like me and some other people were kind of worried about in the middle of the last decade, then that would have been a huge problem. Losing truck drivers, losing taxi drivers, losing cooks, losing customer service employees. Like, yeah, that would have been a problem. Turns out AI is really hard and still has a long ways to go. And I think the more time you give an economy, because economies are dynamic overall, the easier it is to absorb losses from that perspective. And so where I've arrived at now is I'm a lot less concerned. Yeah, over the next couple of decades, we're definitely going to automate a ton of jobs, but we're also going to create a ton of jobs. As kind of a final thought here, I mean, if you look back in the United States 150 years ago, it was something like 97% of all employed people in the United States were involved in the agrarian industry in one way or the other. Fast forward to 2021, and it's like 1.3% of the US population is involved in agriculture. But we're seeing situations where companies are desperate for more employees. So I think we have to get away from the fallacy that automation in and of itself is bad. You just don't want too much automation to happen too quickly. But if you can spread it out over a number of decades, then I think it's good and maybe great from a healthy, dynamic standpoint of an economy.
Yeah, I mean, if I go back 5 to 10 years ago, one of the big things that I noticed back then was there was very often be bringing in new exciting tech solutions and then reduce headcount to pay for it. And I think now that philosophy has completely changed, because now technology is being looked at as a way to maybe complement each other rather than compete against each other. It's not man versus machine or AI versus employees. It's what can they do together and how can you make that boat move faster, I suppose. But what do you think the future of AI and human relations is going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the next 20 to 40 years, by and large, we're going to see AI working alongside employees. I think going back to that issue that AI is not binary, it is predictive, that you have to be able to have some sort of backup. You know, you don't want a semi flying down the highway at 80 miles an hour and the internet crashes or a hard drive crashes and suddenly, you know, you effectively have a bomb traveling down the highway, right? You just are going to need backups. And so whereas today, maybe you have one truck driver to one car, in the near future, maybe you have one truck driver to 5 cars or something like that. And I think that's what we're going to see is more efficiency over the next, you know, couple of decades. Now, I'd say 50 years plus out, you know, we'll definitely see large industries being automated, because I think humanity has shown over time that where there's a will, there's a way. And if companies big and small keep investing billions, tens of billions, in some cases, hundreds of billions of dollars over decades, you're going to wear down the problem and you're going to overcome the problem. And I think AI is going to have a drastic impact on human society. But instead of it being in 10 years that a lot of people predicted and feared, I think it's more like 50 to 100 years. But it will have a very, very wide-ranging and deep implications, both on the nature of work and kind of the future of humanity and our association.
And what about robotics? What kind of developments are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, well, I'm just an uber nerd, so anything AI or robotics piques my interest these days. Yeah. I'll just kind of start with the restaurant space because that's where I'm spending a lot of time. One of the companies I'm really impressed with is Miso Robotics, and they have Flippy, the burger flipping robot. I believe they announced they're coming out with the 2.0 version of it. It's basically this giant robotic arm that hangs down from the ceiling and then it's on a slide, and it can, you know, go back and forth along the edge of a cook surface and flip cheeseburgers or chicken or whatever it's cooking to help kind of automate that food preparation process. That still requires a human to work alongside it. Right now, a human has to put the burgers down. You know, I think that potentially the human has to pull the burgers off of there. So there's still kind of a deep correlation from that standpoint. We're seeing other things. There was a company that actually started here in Denver before it moved out to the Bay Area called Robotics. And they helped places like McDonald's with basically kind of automating the salad creation process. And then now, as I mentioned, that company has obviously been acquired. So I think we're seeing stuff on the software side in terms of kind of automating the input of the orders. And then we're seeing it with robotics on the back of house side of helping to automate the process of cooking food. So I think we'll start to see a lot from that perspective. The Tesla bot is obviously very interesting from my perspective. I don't know yet whether it's vaporware and a marketing stunt to attract engineers, or if Tesla really has, something going on. I think the track record of just Tesla as a company or something like SpaceX, you have to hand it to Musk that he does build and reinvent industries. On the other hand, things like self-driving cars, which, a robot's going to require a significant amount of AI, are taking a lot longer to come to fruition. And so if something like that, or somebody like a Boston Dynamics, or half a dozen of these other companies that are building real bipedal robots, if they're ultimately successful with those will have a very big impact on the economy.
Yeah, again, completely agree with you. We just need him to stop tweeting about Dogecoin and crypto and sending the market up and down the way he does sometimes.
Yeah, we just got sued by JP Morgan and just generally being a bit of a jerk towards Bernie Sanders. And it's like, dude, you don't need Twitter, man. Just focus on helping to reinvent transportation, both planetary and interplanetary, and we'll all be better off for it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned space there, so I've got to go there. I mean, what excites you about the commercialization of space travel? For me, when he sent the Tesla into space, I know it was a bit of a marketing stunt, but for the first time for me, it was almost like we're starting to look and think bigger than this planet, and I think that's going to be a great thing. But what excites you about them?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm glad you asked, because I am a ginormous space nerd amongst robotics and AI. In fact, when I'd be lying in bed as a kid in Dillingham, I would just literally be thinking about space travel. And I think for me, ultimately, a lot of my desires around business and entrepreneurship is to do good and help, create a better future. But it's also, I'll say, just kind of selfishly, a desire to help cover the costs in these early stages when it's super expensive to be able to travel into space and to see, different parts of our solar system. So I'm really, really excited. We have the upcoming launch of Starship in January. And just as a quick comparison for people, when the Apollo landers went to the moon, they could take about 8 tons with them. Starship landed can take 200 tons. So it's an order of magnitude more material that you could bring to the moon for building bases, for building refineries, building transportation. There's going to be, I think, another massive boom from an economic standpoint when humans start to colonize the moon, when humans start to colonize Mars. And I think that maybe kind of reiteratively goes back to some of the concerns around AI and job loss, as you do start to automate a lot of stuff, and that's a concern. But if you're literally opening up whole new worlds for exploration, people are still going to want Starbucks on Mars and a pizza on the moon, and they're going to want to go on, moon buggy rides. So the economic output and capability by opening up these new areas, I think are going to be substantial for the human race.
Oh man, well, I've absolutely loved chatting with you. I could chat with you for hours about this stuff. I think it's something we're both passionate about. But we started the podcast talking about your origin story, but now I'm going to ask you, what has been the soundtrack to that story and your career in tech? Is there one particular song that keeps reoccurring, helps you get your head in the zone, or a story behind that song? If you've got one to share with us, we'll add it to our Spotify playlist.
Great. I will take Drive by Incubus, because I am a kid of the late 90s. And I don't know, there's something about high school where it seems like a lot of music tends to stick with people. And the first time I heard that song, I was getting picked up by family and friends after leaving space camp. So I was very, very fortunate that even though I came from this very rural background, my parents tried to afford a lot of opportunities for me. And one of those was I got to go spend a week at space camp. And it just really helped to kind of open my mind to a whole solar system or galaxy of possibilities versus just one tiny little town. And I heard that song Drive by Incubus after I got picked up. And so I just always have kind of warm feelings sort of associating it both with space camp and friends and family. And, I think maybe there's just a message there for entrepreneurship in general of keep pushing forward.
What a great choice. But before we go any further, I'm going to add that to the Spotify playlist. But you nonchalantly said there, when I was at space camp, and I'm thinking there was a film in about 1988 about space camp, and it was like the coolest thing I've ever seen. I was a teenager at the time. And I thought, so did you go to space camp then? What's the story there?
Yeah, I got to go to space camp down in Huntsville, Alabama. Yeah, my
Oh,
parents were amazing. I think I was in fourth grade at the time, and it was several $1,000s. It was extremely expensive for my family, but my mom and dad wanted me to have that experience, and so they covered it for me and got to fly down there. And you get to do scuba diving and weightless training, and you get to do sort of mock missions of launching rockets, and they have a whole kind of almost field of different American rockets from throughout U.S. history that you get to walk around and you get to learn about. And it was just a really, really kind of cool, almost sort of like life-changing experience to go there and to be involved in that. And then the movie we watched that I really remember is October Sky,
yeah.
which was Jake Gyllenhaal, and he was a coal miner in West Virginia. And actually, my great grandpa was a coal miner in West Virginia, so I think it also kind of had some elements for me there as well. And it was just a really good story, about a kid that comes from a small town, kind of feels isolated from the world, but he worked hard and he didn't quit. And he got to kind of go and live his dreams and exist in a space that I think fit his personality a lot more. So clearly, as we've talked about my journey, there's some crossover there that I feel.
Wow. And the weightless training, did you get to go in? Is it the big aircraft where you can do the weightless stuff? Did you do that? Or
I wish. No, they do a harness. And so it's more of like a trampoline bungee jump kind of situation.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh,
you got to believe it. Despite the rhetoric against these billionaires trying to get people into space, I'm all about it. I'd love to be in line buying the next ticket.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're going to have to get you back on because I've got a feeling you are going to be going up there at some stage. So before I let you go, though, back to Valyant AI. For anyone who wants to find out more information about anything we talked about today, check you out online, contact your team. What's the best starting point?
Yeah, thanks. You can just check out our website, Valiant.ai, or feel free to shoot me an email personally. It's just rob@valiant.ai.
I think we've covered so much in our 30 minutes today. We've gone from Alaska to just about everything about artificial intelligence, robotics, space camp, and even a cracking tune by Incubus too. But I think it's your personal story that brought everything to life. So thank you so much for sharing that with me today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, we really did cover everything there, didn't we? And I could have chatted to Rob about all kinds of crazy stuff for hours. And so a big thank you to Rob for not only coming on here, but also reminding me of that 1986 movie Space Camp with Kelly Preston, Leah Thompson, and I think Tom Skerritt, a.k.a. Viper, and Dallas in Alien. If anybody else out there remembers a film called Space Camp, give me a shout. Please let me know I'm not going completely crazy. So if you can answer that or have any questions to share or insights to share about anything we talked about today, email me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. I don't just say this at the end of every episode for fun. I genuinely mean it. I enjoy connecting with you, talking about random things. And the conversations I've had from these emails coming in can be anything from a couple of DMs, an email, or even getting guests onto this podcast. It is a community we've created. You are a part of it. So even if it's a nonchalant comment about how good or how bad Space Camp was, send me that message or connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Just look for @NeilCHughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you're looking for somebody to help you with your business blogs, thought leadership blogs, and of course, launching your own podcast. Whatever it may be, give me a shout. But that's it for today's episode. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.